I'm Dane Rose, and hello to everyone at the Templeton Foundation. I want to offer you a complimentary copy of my book, which is in the mail. When I formed my nonprofit a few years ago, I wanted to create a thought process that could help me synthesize and make decisions about how to provide the most value for the least amount of energy, which is synonymous with good capitalism, it's synonymous with good design, it's synonymous with sustainability. And in looking at your programs, human sciences, mathematical and physical sciences, life sciences, character and virtue development, public engagement, philosophy and theology, and individual freedom and free markets. One of the things that I have always done in my career as a landscape designer for the past 30 years is to create a circle and identify all the different values, and then look for something that is complementary and synergistic in the center. In other words, given that these are your values, what is the highest possibility of synergizing and expressing all of these different values? Is that possible? And so, your work on human sciences, big questions about human nature, religion, and spirituality, flourishing and other aspects of the human condition. Now, Abraham Maslow has done terrifically good work on the development of a paradigm of a hierarchy of human needs to survive, to experience security of survival, love and belonging, self-esteem, and what I think is key at that juncture is to discover and develop our gifts. But not just do that, bring them into the world successfully enough to create abundance for ourselves and others. And on the foundation of that abundance, to naturally transcend the human self-centeredness, the ego focus, to serve something greater than ourselves. And so the science, the human science, is how do you do that with the best design? In other words, spend the least amount of time, money, and natural resources to produce the highest level of fulfillment of our human needs. And that leads to synergies and microcultures. Charles Dunbar talked about the fact that after 150 people, after group sizes of 150 people, the intimacy starts to deteriorate. So it's very hard to have a sense of love and belonging when you're not seen. And our brain is unable to deeply see and sustainably see more than about 150 people, right? And so creating groups of 150 people is one step towards a number of efficiencies, shared meals, shared use of vehicles, shared workspaces, shared community activities. In the typical Western home, in the home that I'm in right now, $1.3 million home, 90% of the house and space is not used at all 90% of the time, right? So there's an enormous waste there. And so communities can respond to that. And also, I think just as a group attending to human needs, like, do you know how many people in your neighborhood are surviving, are secure in their survival, have a sense of love and belonging? What parts of them have a sense of love and belonging? What parts of you have a sense of love and belonging? And so the human science, to make that a scientific project, to make that scientific is to give each of those needs a 1 to 10 scale, and to measure the protocols that are facilitating movement towards need fulfillment for each member in the community, right? That turns our humanity, our human needs, into a science. Mathematical and physical sciences, I think that, when you think of architecture, when you think of sustainable horticulture, when you think of cooking, right, to make the sciences meaningful. All meaning is on a continuum of pain, right? All human meaning is moving from less pain over here to more sustainable well-being over there. If it has nothing to do with human well-being on the pain well-being continuum, it has no meaning. And so in terms of the sciences, so many of our sciences are so abstract. They have nothing, there's this huge dissociation between what we're doing, what we're studying, and who is experiencing sustainable well-being. Again, in small groups of 100, 150, in deference to Dunbar's law, we can practice sciences and see the results, right, in a higher quality of life. In terms of life sciences, in some way this is all the same, right? Life sciences, human sciences, but the meaning and significance of life processes by which we can better understand humanity's place within nature. One of the things that I think is most important in being able to consider, if you look at the United States today on a continuum, what percentage of people in the United States are asking that question? How do we understand the processes by which we find humanity's place in nature? Is it 1%? Like, I'd be surprised if one person in my neighborhood of 100, in this case I am, more than that, is thinking about that question, right? And so why? Well, a lot of it is the insecurity that is a cultural phenomena. When you're insecure in an addictive phenomena, you don't think about big questions. And so how do you create a certainty around security where the long, in Stephen Covey's words, the important but not urgent things get discussed? And I think that ties into the human science, which means you've got to create need fulfillment and have time left over, right? Which again leads to the efficiency of mathematical and physical sciences. If you do the mathematical and physical sciences well, you can achieve your human needs more efficiently so that you create the space, right? In my model of Medicina, the archetypal 10x living community, you spend 4 hours a day working for money. You spend 4 hours a day in personal time. You spend 4 hours a day in working for your community to make your community a better place. And you spend 4 hours a day in service to, in this case, the nonprofit that I formed to donate my time to. 10x Living, another one. Happiness Data, slightly different focuses. Happiness Data was something I explored and created to answer the question, what is the most intelligent thing that a human being can do to serve not only their own well-being, but the well-being of humanity, not only humanity's well-being, but the ecology that supports humanity. And that led to 10x living, the idea of having a 10 times better life while conserving 75% or at least 70% of the energy that I spend in my Western lifestyle. So, cultural and global perspectives, I think it's very important to understand the science of culture and that the root word of culture is cult, meaning unquestioned habits and assumptions that at one time served the group and that are now, in many cases, liabilities. Right? The asset has pivoted as the larger context has changed into a liability. We can look at eating, right? When we were farmers in the United States 100, 200 years ago, sugar, apple pie, steak, really good food for a hard physical diet of 8 hours a day of farming, right? When you're consuming all those calories, these foods are good, right? As we pivot forward and look at a life of sedentary screen watching, these foods are killing us, right? Because we're not consuming the calories, and yet the culture perpetuates the status quo mindlessly, right? And so cultural and global perspectives, how can you create a microculture that is conscious, where the habits of the group, and what is, back to that 150 person, can you create a microculture with habits in 150 people that propel that group forward dramatically, right? That give them a useful role in the world? And one of the interesting things that, on the life sciences and, our place within nature, the human species is the only species in the history of planet Earth that has the capacity to project life forms, patterns of energy created on Earth out of Earth's orbit to the moon, to Mars, and to forms in our galaxy. So you could look at human beings as the sex organs of the planet, capable of encapsulating life forms gestated, given birth to on Earth, and shoot them out to Mars, to the moon, and create a sustainable, biodiverse ecosystem on those bodies that would not exist, that could not exist without the role of human beings and the sciences leading to rocketry, courtesy of Musk and others who have, are really focusing on the science, the technology of moving large patterns of energy from Earth out into space, which will require and challenge cultural assumptions. When we find ourselves in a completely new environment with a small group of people, how do you build a microculture that is sustainable, that doesn't lead to suicide, that doesn't lead to murder, that doesn't lead to sabotage, that doesn't lead to depression, right? Because one angry person in an ecodome on Mars can, suck up the air vacuum, can throw a knife, can make a cut, make a tear, leave the hatch open, and that's $1 billion down the drain. And we don't understand cultural design. Cultural design is what results, is the source of 90% of human behavior. 90% of what's happening on this planet today has a cultural origin. has a cultural recipe, a default, and it's not being questioned. And it's not a very good design. If you look at every single cult, every single culture in human history, objectively, you see huge inefficiencies, huge blind spots. And it's the cult-like nature of culture that creates those blind spots. How do you create a new cultural identity? Well, you can't do it with millions overnight, but you can do it with groups of 100. And that's the initial seed, right? The seed energy going to a place like Mars or the moon. It's going to be small groups. And we need to know scientifically which protocols work best to create a culture and to sustain that culture. And you don't want to do that with $1 billion infrastructure on the line, where the fragile point is one person who breaks. You want to do that in a comfortable, safe, experimental environment, Earth. And you want to do a lot of them, and you want to find which microcultures work. You want to know that before you pick the winning cultural design to project into space. And that's a lot of what Medicina, the archetypal community, is about. Now, culture induces qualities. If you put 1,000 people in a sociopathic environment, they become more sociopathic. Because in a sociopathic environment, reptilian behavior keeps you alive, and empathic behavior kills you. Right? It has no benefit. Right? And so it's not fun to be a reptile, but you will survive, right? In prison or whatever, you will survive a sociopathic environment understanding reptilian behavior, right? And so if you want to induce virtue, kindness, empathy, compassion, right? Friendship, you have to create an environment that has a strong security of survival, but you also have to induce a culture that is emotionally literate. We live, you and I, in the United States, live in a traumatically illiterate culture, in a psychologically illiterate culture, in a relationally illiterate culture, in an emotionally illiterate culture, right? I've interviewed, more than 50 random couples around the U.S., asking them basic questions about their partner that every partner needs to know to attune, and the odds are not good. Less than 10% of people who have been married in some cases for decades can answer basic important questions about their spouse, right? Whether it's love languages, or what do you most appreciate, or what do you find most irritating, or what do you want understood that isn't, that your partner doesn't know. It's astounding that in 10 minutes, a competent stranger can learn more about a married couple than they know about themselves after 5 years, right? That is a psychologically illiterate culture, right? So what do you do with that, right? How can you develop virtue? How can you create a culture that induces virtue when we know so little about ourselves and about each other? And those are all on various continuums of intimacy, of transparency, right? There's 100 questions that every person needs to know the answer to deeply attune to you. And in many cases, you don't know the answers to those questions. But nobody else does either, right? So how do you create a culture where those questions are the cult, where those are the default, automatic? You ask those questions, you ask those questions. I became traumatically illiterate in the United States, not due to any therapeutic help. In fact, all of my therapists kept me completely ignorant about trauma and PTSD. I became traumatically literate by asking one of my questions to a stranger in a cafe. After $150,000 of therapy, I asked a stranger in a cafe, what are you up to? What's the most exciting thing in your world? And he started talking about a workshop on trauma and PTSD. And as I listened, I understood there was a huge blind spot that neither I nor my therapists were addressing, and was able to do the 1,000 hours of study and research and reading that helped me understand that one of the biggest curses, one of the biggest costs, taxes to the American cult is trauma ignorance, trauma illiteracy. We know how to traumatize our children, our relationship partners. We know how to induce PTSD and complex PTSD. We do not know how to heal it. We do not know how to create post-traumatic growth. And we are not studying it in any kind of an intelligent, optimal way. And so that's, again, back to human sciences. You cannot meet your need to survive when you're in trauma, which is the fear of your identity collapsing. That's back to level one. But you cannot develop virtues when you're in a traumatized state. Trauma triggers the reptilian brain and sociopathic protocols and narcissistic self-centeredness. Once you heal trauma and meet your human needs, it is as natural as a flower opening to start creating virtues, right? If we will fulfill our own needs and meet our needs of self-love, the need of the child, the desire of the adolescent, and the service and fulfillment of the adult, it's as natural as water running downhill to start loving other people. Public engagement, right? If you're going to do all this science, why not share it in real time with the public, right? So in metadata with apps and in YouTube videos to share what works and what doesn't work. That's what science is. You have a hypothesis. You say, I think if we add this 5-minute ritual into our group of 100 people, we will see these changes in human well-being. Well, you add it in. You do it for a month. You have to get over the fear of the unknown, right? So you have to have a map that understands that anytime you change your culture, you're going to trigger the human's greatest fear, the unknown, resistance to change, right? So you have to give time to go through that turbulence and then measure the results on the other side of that turbulence, right? And ideally, you want to get enough yield, enough sustainable well-being coming out of that to be worth the cost of the turbulence and worth the cost of the learning, time, money, and energy to learn, and then yield so much sustainable well-being on the other side that it pays for all of that, right? That's the science of well-being, and why not share it freely as metadata for other people to try in groups of 100 people? We need 1,000 groups of 100 people, carefully measuring the inputs, right? The people that are coming in, how depressed you are, how this, how that. How do you arrive in this protocol? Then what dynamics do you change as you live together? And then what are the outputs? What is the amount of sustainable well-being produced for that amount of time, that amount of money, that amount of natural resources? We need those. And we need groups of 1,000 playfully competing to be the most intelligent culture. To say we know the fastest way to take a group of a group of 100 human people and turn them into highly functioning, fulfilled individuals, right? And these are the protocols we used, right? To select people, to live together, right? To talk together, to bathe together, etc. This is what we did. And these are the inputs, these are the outputs, right? We need that. Now, philosophy, theology, again, all meaning comes from the pain continuum or the well-being continuum. They're the same, right? What matters? Is it significant to save someone's life? Because that has about as much impact in well-being and pain as anything, right? To kill someone or to save someone's life is about as much meaning as you can get into an action. But then there's all these gray points, right? And theosophy or philosophy and theology, right? They're just trying to get towards that, a meaningful life. Well, there's nothing more meaningful than being able to connect every one of your words, every one of your actions with the well-being of people you see and experience on a daily basis, right? You don't have to debate that. That's real. That's visceral. And individual freedom and free markets, like how do you create a culture that is both prescriptive, right? We do this exercise, we eat this food, we grow these vegetables, that's prescriptive and yet free. Well, that's where the 1,000 microcultures come in, right? Everyone wants sustainable well-being. Everyone wants to avoid chronic and unnecessary suffering. But everyone has a different level of toxicity around certain energies, right? If you've been around a control freak your entire life, then having no one around to boss you is what's medicinal. Whereas someone else has been abandoned their entire life, has had no direction, no structure, and so the medicine for them is, finally, someone is telling me what to do, who cares about me and who knows, right? So toxicity and medicine have a lot to do with past and context, right? So what's medicinal for one person is toxic for another, and what is toxic at this dose is medicinal at this dose. Right? So it's about dose and it's about understanding context. But freedom is about choice, right? But it's not abstract. Freedom is absolutely useless if it's, I just want to be free so I can be free so I can be free, right? It's not a God in and of itself. The reason freedom has value, the only freedom that has any value, is the freedom to choose a better path, a scientifically verifiable path that my well-being and the well-being of those I love and the well-being of the planet goes up in measurable ways because I did this instead of that, right? So freedom is valuable because I can do the best protocol, because I can follow the right path, the path that takes me sustainably towards a more beautiful world. It's freedom in service of a more beautiful world, right? So you need variety, and that's why I'd say there's few things that our planet needs more than 1,000 science-based microcultures that each have different emphasis, so that people have the freedom of which ones to join or the freedom to start their own, right? It's a lot of work to start your own, etc. But if your recipe for beauty doesn't exist, then it's the freedom to start your own. It's not the freedom to vegetate, to deteriorate, to dissociate, and to addict, right? Who needs that freedom, right? It's the freedom to create a more beautiful world. And free markets, right? That we're talking about freedom of choice. We're also talking about competition, the healthy aspect, to draw out the best in one another, right? To try and work together as a group to create the highest amount of sustainable well-being for everyone in the group, right? And measure that, right? And correlate it to protocols and continue to refine that recipe, to not fall asleep in your cult, in your culture, but to continually edit the discipline, the practice, the protocol, right? And export the metadata, right? That's what we need. And if you do something this good, why shouldn't it be in high demand? If you and I can create a microculture that is 10 times more satisfying, more meaningful than the typical cult, the typical culture. If we can do that at 1/3 the price, any intelligent person who can get over their fear of the unknown and who can think, right? And we don't produce a lot of people that are competent to analyze all of that, but they can at least visit a place and say, oh, I'm much happier here than here. And so if there's a path towards that, right, of joining a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, that's all a culture is, a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that brings out the best in us. Why would we leave, right? And so the goal of doing this, right? The goal of creating microcultures, the goal of, creating a 10x giving, right? That is coming out of love. That's coming out of empathy, right? Wanting a more beautiful world. It's, you have to be a fool to think that money, which is the substitute for value, is worth more than that, right? So money is a path to that. So when I started focusing on this, I did a little exercise for 30 days, spending 30 minutes for 30 days, trying to have the most positive impact with $30 or less. And it was a great thing, and it one of the things that emerged out of there is if I'm going to start spending money to help people, I don't want to be paying tax on the money, right? And so there's this wonderful little setup where nonprofits under $50,000 can, just breeze right through, no paperwork, right? So I can give money to my nonprofit and then answer that question, how to bring about the highest amount of sustainable well-being with the least amount of effort, right? Because doing lots of taxes and paper, that's effort, right? That's not helping anyone. That's part of the problem, right? And so, the nonprofit, and then how to run a nonprofit more efficiently, right? That's a good question, right? And can I connect with other nonprofits that are asking that same question, right? That's a good question. So this project, right, an eco-village in Costa Rica, is emerging out of these questions, these answers. And it's not an either or, right? My goal is that my nonprofit never has to raise money. My goal is that my nonprofit is profitable. It's just that we're not distributing money to shareholders to make more and more money. We're distributing money to build microcultures that are sustainable and producing scientific data that could be used to take our species off planet sustainably, successfully, without billion-dollar infrastructure blowups because of interpersonal conflicts, right? We've got to solve that. And so this is my invitation to anyone at the Templeton Foundation to talk on camera, reach out, participate, and thanks for all the work you're doing.